Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to day 3 of Peace Week. My name is Ben Bowler from Unity Earth, and this is day 94 of the 99 days of peace through unity. And I'm really excited about our morning plenary this morning, which is dedicated to a subject which I know is very, very dear to so many of our hearts, which is how to get to a world beyond war. I just want to welcome our guests for today, our speakers, David Swanson, Phill Gittins, Maya Garfinkel. Welcome to Peace Week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
You're very, very welcome. And as we prepare to learn about your activities at World Beyond War, which has come through Bob and Noel from the Co-Creators Convergence, who are so excited to be able to get you guys to come and speak to us. So thank you for being available, and an international team with David in the US, Maya in Canada, and Phill in continental Europe. And we're going to be having a very substantive conversation today. There will be some time for questions and answers a little later on. So if you're here in the Zoom room, do pop some questions in the chat as we go through. But I'm going to start today with our 99 Days of Peace Through Unity and Peace Week promotion, just because I think there's some themes in here that our speakers are definitely going to be speaking to. So let's start with that, and then we'll introduce our speakers.
Let me tell you about the lie we've been living in for centuries, millennia. They say peace through domination's justifiable while building up the arsenal. All the sages and wise men of the ages were guiding us to look within ourselves. But the fear so divisive and the lies so enticing, we keep spinning this hell. Shine your light, you are the future being told. Cultivating seeds we've sown.
99 days of peace through unity. 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 99 days of peace through unity.
Well, excellent. That 99 Days of Peace Through Unity is asking the question, is peace through unity possible? And if so, how can we achieve it? And it's in direct contrast to the dominant paradigm for centuries and maybe millennia that peace is only achievable through superior firepower. And that's something I'm sure that's going to be put under the microscope by our speakers today, that theory of peace, if you like. So I want to just briefly introduce our guests. If I can just navigate my way to the right window here. Sorry, there's my Mac is excited to play that video, but now it's struggling to find its place. So, okay, I want to introduce firstly David Swanson. David Swanson is co-founder, executive director, and a board member of World Beyond War. He's based in Virginia in the United States. David is an author, activist, journalist, and radio host. He is campaign coordinator for rootsaction.org. Swanson's books include War is a Lie. He blogs at davidswanson.org and warisacrime.org. He hosts Talk World Radio. He's a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and was awarded the 2018 Peace Prize by the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. So really, really wonderful to have you here with us, David. Also with us is Maya Garfinkel. Garfinkel. Sorry, Maya. Maya Garfinkel is World Beyond War's Canada organizer, Maya is a community and student organizer based in Montreal, Canada, on unceded Canadian Kehaka territory. She is currently finishing up her BA in Political Science and Geography at McGill University. As an undergraduate, Maya has organized at the intersection of the climate and peace movements with Divest McGill, Students for Peace and Disarmament at McGill, and the Divest for Human Rights campaign. They've also worked on mobilizations around decolonization, anti-racism, and democratization across North America. So outside of political work, Maya can often be found cooking communally, engaging with multi-faith collaboration, or exploring a new city park. Maya, it's great to have you with us as well. And last but not least, we have Phill Gittins. We'll just pull up Phil's bio here. Phill Gittins, PhD, is World Beyond War's Education Director. He's from the UK and based in Bolivia. Dr. Phill Gittins has over 20 years of leadership, programming, and analysis experience in the areas of peace, education, youth and community development, and psychotherapy. He has lived, worked, and traveled in over 50 countries across 6 continents, taught in schools, colleges, and universities around the world, and trained thousands on peace and social change-related issues. Other experiences include work in youth offending prisons, oversight management for research and activism projects, and consultancy assignments for public and non-profit organizations on peace, education, and youth issues. So, wow, what an august panel and an amazing organization. I know all of us at Unity Earth and Peace Week are looking forward to learning a lot more about your work at World Beyond War. So, David Swanson, without further ado, please take us into it. How do we get to a world beyond war?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to everyone involved here. A wonderful song and video there, very much enjoyed. Hope we can get a link to that. Thanks for including us. So I'm going to speak, and then Phill is going to discuss the educational work that can move us away from war. And then Maya is going to discuss the nonviolent activism that can do the same. So I get essentially the easy part, which is why we should abolish war. And to do that, I'm going to try to share screen here and look at a PowerPoint, and you all can let me know if it's working and if I should be changing anything about it.
Working beautifully, David. Working beautifully.
Great. So I say this is the easy part. It's an even easier part. Well, that didn't work. That worked. It's an even easier part when a particular war isn't dominating your televisions and media outlets. I won't say in times of peace, because for decades now, there have always constantly been numerous wars, usually with several of them involving the US military, always with virtually all of them involving US weaponry, frequently US weaponry on both sides. But sometimes all the current wars join that largest ongoing public project in the US, the massive constant funding and preparations for war in moving off stage. And we call those times the times of peace. Vegetarians between meals love peace in times of peace. See if I can get to the next slide. I can. As an example of what happens when you speak up for peace in times of war, a brilliant artist in Australia named Peter Seaton recently painted a mural of a Ukrainian soldier and a Russian soldier hugging. He had asked people about his plans, including local Ukrainians, and they had thought it sounded great. But some of the same people joined in a disturbing sort of groupthink once the mural was up, going so far as to declare themselves traumatized, not to mention offended. How dare an artist, now suspected, of course, of working for Moscow, depict soldiers hugging while the evil Russian soldiers were actually killing Ukrainians? I think there was no mention of what Ukrainian soldiers are doing. As someone who daily receives angry emails defending the two different sides of this war, I can easily imagine supporters of the Russian side indignantly professing their outrage at not depicting the Ukrainian soldier slitting the Russian's throat. It's less clear to me that the good people of Melbourne, so offended by hugging, would have found it tasteful to show the two soldiers hacking each other with knives. For virtually any audience, one of the two soldiers would have to be stabbing the other in the back while the victim penned a beautiful note home to his mother. Now that would be art. What have we come to that we're outraged by hugging? Do we not want reconciliation? Do we not wish for peace? While we all know of the Christmas truces of World War I, a photo from which you're seeing, and similar incidents, while we can all think in general of soldiers as the victims of top government officials, we are supposed to reserve such thoughts for all wars in general, but never for the current war, during the sacred and beautiful demonization phase in which we live and breathe our hatred for the leader and every supporter of the other side, whichever side that is. I've had friends of many years, including radio hosts, and you can go and listen to these shows, scream at me that I can either demand Putin's immediate assassination or admit that I am working for Putin. And I've had other friends of many years accuse me of working for NATO. These are all people who could unite against the war on Iraq, at least when that war was identified with a US president of the Republican Party.
David, just a quick note. When you're turning the page, you seem to be brushing up against the microphone of your computer. So just be careful of that.
Yeah, I'm honestly not. I'm like a foot away from it, but nonetheless, it has done that in the past.
Okay.
I will mute myself, turn the page, and unmute myself.
Okay.
Because opposing both sides of a war is usually understood as supporting whichever side someone else opposes, I've taken to inhaling deeply and blurting out the following run-on sentence. I oppose all of the horrible killing and destruction in Ukraine, fully aware of the imperialistic history of Russia and of the fact that NATO expansion predictably and intentionally led to this war, disgusted that peace activists in Russia are locked up, and sickened that they are so effectively ignored in the US that it's not needed except for high-profile whistleblowers. And I hold these weird positions while actually not suffering from any particularly extreme ignorance of the history of the Cold War or NATO expansion or the death grip of US weapons dealers on the US government or the status of the US government as top weapons dealer, top promoter of militarism to other governments, top foreign base builder, top war instigator, top coup facilitator, and yes, thank you. I have heard about the right-wing lunatics in the Ukrainian as well as the Russian governments and militaries. I just haven't picked one of the two to want killing people or overseeing nuclear weapons or power plants during battles. And I am indeed sickened by all the slaughtering of people the Russian military is engaged in, even while I cannot fathom why human rights groups should feel ashamed for reporting on the atrocities being committed by the Ukrainian military. And I do know how much the US and UK have done to prevent peaceful resolution, as well as how much Russia has. And I am aware that some Russians feel scared and threatened, and that Russian-speaking Ukrainians have felt scared and threatened, just as I am aware that other Ukrainians, not to mention Western television viewers, feel scared and threatened. In fact, I myself feel quite scared and threatened that the risk of nuclear apocalypse is going to keep climbing while the war continues. And I think that both sides, while radically different and deserving blame for very different things, should be able to recognize at the very least that a stalemate that drags on and on, killing and destroying while building the risk of nuclear war, serves nobody other than the weapons dealers, not even the politicians, so that it would be better to negotiate peace now than to do so later or to find it to be too late, that the world has non-optional environmental and disease crises it could be better dealing with in the absence of this insane butchery. And this could be recognized with or without recognizing that the two sides have been able to negotiate with some outside help on questions of grain exports and prisoner exchanges, rendering ridiculous the tired claims by both sides that the other side is a monster with whom you shouldn't and couldn't negotiate. And with or without recognizing that both sides have engaged in both unspeakable horrors and restraint of various sorts, targeting helpless people for death and suffering both more than is acceptable, needless to say, none is acceptable, and less than is possible, and with or without beginning to open any minds to the alternatives that existed for both sides, even at the point of greatest escalation and the nonviolent, unarmed defense alternatives that exist for governments and nations around the world, should they choose to pursue them on the scale that would make them most effective. By the way, we're putting that hug mural, which was taken down in Melbourne, up on walls and buildings and billboards and yard signs around the world. I am going to mute for 1 second. I am hoping to have unmuted, but I need to get to the next slide. A World Beyond War. At World Beyond War, we have created a website that addresses 4 sets of myths common to war support. That war can be inevitable, justified, necessary, or beneficial. Most people live without war and without ever suffering from war deprivation. Most human history and prehistory is without war. Most war in history bears very little resemblance to war today. Nations have used war for centuries and then not used war for centuries. Most participants in and victims of war suffer from it. Just war theory is medieval nonsense concocted by people trying to reconcile imperialism, pacifism, the belief that pagans are worthless, and the belief that the good people are better off if they're killed. Wars are very carefully and laboriously maneuvered into, huge energies going into fending off peace. Not a single humanitarian war has yet benefited humanity. War requires major preparations and conscious decision. It doesn't blow across the world like the weather or a disease. Not far from my house are giant bunkers under hills where various parts of the US government are supposed to hide after having been given several hours warning that someone has decided to create a nuclear apocalypse. There are alternatives to preparing the world for war, and there are alternatives to using war in the moment of being attacked by someone else using war. In fact, it is possible to stop arming the world, to support the rule of law and cooperation, and to prepare unarmed defense strategies. Through organized, nonviolent actions, occupations have been ended in places like Lebanon, Germany, Estonia, and Bougainville. Coups have been stopped in places like Algeria and Germany. Dictators overthrown in places like El Salvador, Tunisia, and Serbia. Armed takeovers by corporations blocked in places like Ecuador and Canada. Foreign military bases kicked out of places like Ecuador and the Philippines. See worldbeyondwar.org for elaboration of all of these points debunking the myths of war. We, of course, include huge volumes of material on World War II, on which I've written a book called Leaving World War II Behind. And we've done an online course on the topic. It might even make sense to watch the new film on the US and the Holocaust by Ken Burns at Alia. But here's my prediction. And having watched a third of the thing last night, I stand by this. The film will be surprisingly honest, but shift blame subtly away from the US and other governments and on to ordinary people. Will omit the efforts of peace activists to get the US and UK governments to act. Will exaggerate how hard it would have been for them to do so, and will defend the war as perfectly justified for reasons other than everyone's favorite reason, now debunked by the film. I hope it's better than that. It could be worse. I'm muting. And I'm unmuting. While there has yet to be a war that can clearly be celebrated as morally defensible from any side, there is a great tendency to imagine one and to invest enough resources to totally transform the world. I mean, to end environmental destruction, poverty, and homelessness into preparing for the imagined good war. But were there actually a war that did more good than harm, it would still never do enough good to outweigh having kept the institution of war, the standing armies, the bases, the ships, the planes around waiting for the just war to arrive. This is so both because military preparedness generates wars, most of which nobody tries to defend as just, and also because the institution of war kills more than the wars. through its environmental destruction, its promotion of bigotry, its erosion of the rule of law, its justification for secrecy in governance, and especially through its diversion of resources from human needs. 3% of just US military spending could end starvation on Earth. Militarism is first and foremost a literally unfathomable spending of money, a fraction of which could transform any number of urgently needed projects on a global scale, if the globe could bring itself to cooperate on things, the greatest impediment to which is war and preparations for war. So, we've also included on the website at worldbeyondwar.org links to reasons for ending war, including it's immoral, it endangers, it erodes liberty, it promotes bigotry, it wastes $2 trillion a year, it threatens the environment, it impoverishes us, and alternatives exist. So the bad news is that war ruins everything it touches, and it touches darn near everything. The good news is that if we could see past the flags and propaganda, we could build a massive coalition of darn near everybody, including even most of the people making the weapons, who would be happier and better off with other jobs. A rather sad side effect of media focus on a war is the silence on other wars. We hear very little about the suffering and starvation in Afghanistan while the US government steals those people's money. We hear next to nothing about the ongoing disease and starvation in Yemen while the US Congress refuses to do what it pretended to do to help Yemen 3 years ago, namely vote to end a war. I want to finish by focusing on that because so many lives are in the balance, and because the precedent of the US Congress actually ending a war would give a huge boost to campaigns to demand that it end some other wars as well. Despite campaign promises, the Biden administration and the US Congress keep the weapons flowing to Saudi Arabia and keep the US military participating in the war on Yemen. We can say similar things about the Canadian and British and other governments. Despite both houses of Congress voting to end US participation in the war when Trump had promised a veto, neither house has held a debate or a vote in the year and a half since Trump left town. A House resolution has 113 co-sponsors, more than were ever obtained by the resolution passed and vetoed by Trump, while a resolution in the Senate has 7 co-sponsors, yet no votes are held because the congressional so-called leadership chooses not to, and because not one single member of the House or Senate can be found who's willing to compel them to. It's never been a secret that the Saudi-led war is so dependent on the US military, not to mention US weapons, that were the US to either stop providing the weapons or compel its military to cease violating all of the laws against war, never mind the US Constitution, or both, the war would end. The Saudi-US war on Yemen has killed many more people than the war in Ukraine thus far, and the death and suffering continue despite a temporary truce, which has failed to open roads or ports. Famine, potentially aggravated by the war in Ukraine, still threatens millions. CNN reports that, quote, while many in the international community celebrate the truce, some families in Yemen are left watching their children slowly die. There are around 30,000 people with life-threatening diseases requiring treatment abroad, according to the Houthi-controlled government in the capital, Sana'a. Some 5,000 of them are children, end quote. The passionate speeches by senators and representatives demanding an end to the war when they knew they could count on a veto from Trump have vanished during the Biden years, chiefly because party is more important than human lives. Now, I think I've strayed into both education and activism, but I hope not to have overlapped with what Phill and Maya will be discussing. I do want to note that for those inclined to make important arguments for why we cannot abolish all war. There will be someone doing that in a debate with me 2 days from now, and you can watch it online and suggest questions to the moderator. You can find that debate at worldbeyondwar.org. Also, I look forward to lots of questions for me and Phill and Maya after our presentations. And I will pass the microphone to Phill Gittins.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here all with you. Before continuing, it'd be nice to get a sense of who's here with us. So if it's okay, and if you feel comfortable, you can turn on your camera and I will ask a question. If the answer is yes, you can either put up your hands or wave or do something, or you can do a reaction like this, or something like this, etc., just to get a sense of who's here with us. Okay. So, and the questions that I'll ask will have some kind of bearing in terms of what Maya and I will talk about. So first of all, put your hands up or wave or do a reaction if you are from the US. Okay, great. So put your hands up, do a wave if you're not from the US. Okay. Great. Put your hands up, do a wave, etc. If, and this is subjective, if you're a young person. Okay, great. Good stuff. Put your hands up, do a wave if you have heard of World Beyond War before today. Okay, great. We've got a nice little sense of, okay, thank you. So feel as if we kind of know each other a little bit better now. So thank you so much for that. So having looked, David's done a great job in terms of the importance of why we need to move to a world beyond war. The question now is, well, how do we move towards that? And that's what Maya and I are going to look at. In order to do that, I'm going to try and share my screen. And if you can see my screen, can you put your thumbs up maybe that I can, you can see it? Okay.
It's coming, Phill.
It's coming, okay, it's coming. So while it's coming, this might be my laptop. One of the things that we need to think about in terms of moving towards a world beyond war. No, it didn't work. Let me try again. Oh, can you see this? Can you see my screen now? Yes. Perfect. One of the things we need to think about in terms of moving to a world beyond war, but actually broader social change, is that we need two things. And research shows that we need both reflection and action, or let's say education and action. And that's the way in which World Beyond War work. We in broad strokes, we can think of our work as trying to educate more people more effectively around the issues of war and how to move towards a sustainable and just peace. But of course, education is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also need action, but action is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to educate people to engage more effectively in these issues, hence the combination of reflection and action. So I want to talk about what is some of the work that we do in World Beyond War, give a perspective on trying to support people and educate them around how to move towards a world beyond war. The presentation will move broadly from broad brush strokes, conceptual to specific. Okay, and as we're moving along, you might want to think about, well, what's education like in where I live? How are we educating all generations and all cultures to move towards a world beyond war and closer to a peace system? The way in which we do this is that we have a number of resources, and I will list them here and say a little bit more. But we have books, online courses, Study War No More guide, webinars, podcasts, fact sheets, articles, PowerPoint presentations. We have our annual conference. We have something called a Peace Almanac book, which is a great counter to the over-focus on telling the story, the heroes of war, or the stories of war that we hear day in, day out. The book actually lays out, oh, did you know in this year and this day, this movement happened for peace, as a way of telling a different story, mapping militarism and Speakers Bureau. And Maya is going to give a perspective and talk shortly about action. So in order to do this, so we want to make this argument, there's no viable approach to a world beyond war and thus sustainable peace that does not leverage the skills and knowledge of all generations and all cultures, hence kind of the question at the beginning to see who's here with us. So we need to think about how do we engage all generations and all cultures in this work? Well, one of the ways we try and do this is through our online courses. David's already spoke about some of them. We're running 4 this year, Leaving World War II Behind, War Abolition 101, and War in the Environment. We've already run this year, and we always have at least 100 plus on our 6-week courses. The aim of our courses is to, as David spoke about, kind of debunk the myths of war, but also think through what are some of the skills, knowledge, strategies, techniques, tactics, etc., that we need to move us from our current system, which is undoubtedly the war system, towards a peace system where peace is pursued by peaceful means. The good news is that we've run 3. And the good news is that we will run another one in October. So please, 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 if you're interested, sign up for War Abolition 201 as a chance to engage with some of these things that we've been speaking about. But I think one of the other wonderful things about our course is that it's a really kind of a community of inquiry, of bringing people together who are interested in moving towards a world beyond war and towards a just and sustainable peace. And they engage together. There's great content, there's great material, but I think one of the most wonderful things is the opportunity to learn from and with each other on these courses. So if of interest, please sign up, and we'll put it in the chat, the link of how you can go and sign up. Thinking about intergenerational cross-cultural work, we're very fortunate on our courses to have a good mix of different generations and a good mix of different cultures. So the youngest that I know of on our course is 13. The oldest that I know of is 94. So how about that for intergenerational kind of collaboration? That's exactly what we need to be doing, learning and working together. The people that tend to take our courses range from students, activists, educators, right up to PhDs, professors, etc. So it's a real learning laboratory bringing people together. And here, some of the people that have taken our courses and wrote a little bit about their experiences. Here's our Study War No More guide that we did in collaboration with the Global Campaign for Peace Education, a free online resource for those educators that are interested in how can I maybe generate or facilitate some conversations around some of these issues of how to move towards a world beyond war, the role of young people, the role of women, reconciliation, global governance, civil society. So if you go online, Study War No More, you can check out a whole host of free resources which might be helpful. The good news is that we have global recognition for some of the work we do around education and more broadly. Action, the 2021 US Peace Prize, and before that, the Global Educators Challenge Award awarded World Beyond War for their creative approaches to peace education and global challenges such as war abolition, climate change, etc. But here's another argument. Yes, of course, all generations are important. Yes, of course, all cultures are important. But a good case could be made right now that much more attention should be put towards working with young people in particular in terms of moving towards a world beyond war. Why is that? Well, now we have more young people on the planet than ever before in the whole of history. Think about it. All of the world's governments, all of the world's religions espouse their own versions of peace. They all talk about peace, but ask yourself, how many schools around the world, how many universities around the world are teaching peace, are teaching young people the skills, networks, resources needed to move us away from a world beyond war to a culture of peace? Not many, because of the overfocus on war. So that is part of idea. But the question is not so much we need education, of course. The question is, what kind of education do we need? And if we look at, let's say, schools, universities, they're quite strong in terms of concepts, in terms of theories, but not as strong in terms of the doing part. And I think sometimes as activists, we lean too far one side also, over to the activism part, and sometimes miss out on the important kind of thinking element. We now know that as human beings, we're not a brain on a stick. Okay, we are made up of what we call head, heart, hands. So we need to work the thinking, the being, how do we be in relationship with others, but also the doing as well. So this is part of our challenge, I think. How do we try and support well-grounded and well-rounded peace builders? So with this in mind, what we need to be doing, I think, in terms of educating people around how to move towards a world beyond war, is encouraging them first and foremost to turn the mirror inwards. You know, Gandhi spoke about be the change you want to see in the world. And then, of course, we're not just in the world on our own. So inner peace is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to communicate and be in relationships with others. So this idea of non-violent communication is necessary, but it's also not sufficient either. What we need to do is look at three levels, we think. Self, inner peace, peace with others, and peace with systems. So this is part of our challenge that we try and look at in World Beyond War. And in order to move from the abstract to a really concrete example, we're going to give an example of a project that we did last year with 12 countries, young people, communities in 12 different countries across 3 different continents. The project looked at the head of peace building. So, you know, what is peace? What is war? What is conflict? What is violence? What is power? And then the heart of peace building. So how do I be in peace with myself, but then peace with others? So this non-violent communication side of things. But then again, of course, our knowledge, our way of being, let's say, is ultimately judged on what we do in the world. Behaviors matter. You know, opinions are great, but at the end of the day, behaviors matter. So how do we put into practice some of the ideas, etc., that we're learning on the courses? So we need to support, and we try and support those that we work with to think through, how do we design, implement, and Maya's going to be talking about this, strategies, projects, initiatives, etc., to try and make a concrete impact on the ground. Well, the good news, we have many examples of doing this. This is one project that we did last year in collaboration with Rotary, which is the largest business and service organization in the world with 1,200,000 members. It was a huge project, first of its kind for the whole of the peace building field, first of its kind for the whole of Rotary, first of its kind for the whole of the World Beyond War, where we engaged young people and communities in a developmental peace education and action project. Peace education was 6 weeks online, and we engaged these countries. Each country had a country project team made up of 10 young people, 18 to 35, and then 4 adults who kind of served as coordinators and mentors. So it was a real intergenerational collaborative effort. They went through 6 weeks of peace education online from where they were in the world, looking at 2 weeks of the head, 2 weeks of the heart, 2 weeks of the hands, followed by 8 weeks of peace action. So they took what they learned online, took what they learned through the community of practice, and actually did projects in their community. I won't go into this now, but it's basically, this is what it looks like visually. What they did is move from 6 weeks of peace education to 8 weeks of action. Part of the idea with this is, how do we support participants, young people, to move from being, let's say, objects, so peace building done to them, to becoming what we call subjects, so where they are the agents of change. They are actually doing the peace projects in their community. And we had this idea of this community of practice throughout, where, let's say, Venezuela, South Sudan, Cameroon, Ukraine, Russia, young people had chance to learn from each other about this great work and share their perspectives on some of the opportunities and challenges that they face, trying to move towards a world where a world beyond war. Here's some of the impacts. We trained young people in 12 different countries. We trained about 40 different mentors, adults who worked with young people. It culminated in over 15 youth-led peace projects in all of these 12 countries. Here's one example of the country project team, Venezuela. You can see a good mix of intergenerational collaboration there with young people, adults, etc., who worked together and learned a lot with and from each other. Just to give you an example, what does it look like in practice? Here are a snippet of some of the projects which the young people did. Colombia, because they had 10 young people, but 9 young people in different departments across the country, actually did 10 different projects, ranging from film screenings, workshops, urban gardening, through to recording a podcast. Another great project, the US did a really nice project. They did an album called the Peace Accords, where they actually drew from what they learned on the 6 weeks of peace education, looking at things like inner peace, outer peace, negative peace, positive peace, the war system, etc., and did an album around that. Other good examples of projects: Nigeria, trying to address the issue of kidnapping in their country, brought police officers, community members, etc., together to look around that. And actually, they've just recently put together a policy brief, which is trying to advocate for broader change in the country. Cameroon was a really nice example of addressing youth exclusion in the country. And they actually got a letter from one of the ministers congratulating him for their great work. So here hopefully gives you an example. Here's the end of Project Celebration, where the young people had a platform to share their ideas with other young people from other different parts of the world. This project, Peace Education Action for Impact, was always designed as a model for moving forward. So the question that we're grappling with now is how can we build on last year? And we're actually thinking through the next steps of the project, which will involve another 10 countries, including from Ethiopia, Iran, India, Pakistan, Bosnia, etc., among others. So that was Peace Education and Action for Impact last year. So hopefully in the presentation, we've given a bit of a perspective on, okay, we now know that the biggest challenge is how do we move towards a world beyond war? We now know that education plays an important part, and hopefully we've give a little bit of insight in terms of how World Beyond War try to educate more people more effectively around these issues. But of course, education is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need action. And with that in mind, we'll turn over to our colleague Maya, who will talk about our work in that realm. Thank you, Maya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Phill and David, and thank you so much to Ben and the whole Peace Week team for including us today. As has been mentioned, my name is Maya, and I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War. A few minutes ago, David just explained to us a bit about the myths of war and why war must be abolished. And if you've been convinced of that, then you're likely thinking about not only how can we educate to talk about those issues, but also how can we actually accomplish and dispel those myths completely and replace it with something better, most importantly. So I'm here today to close out this part of the webinar with a discussion about how nonviolent activism can move us away from war and towards a world of peace. And during this discussion, I'm just going to talk briefly about sort of what nonviolent activism is, more broadly, why it should be used, and then I'm going to talk more about how we actually do nonviolent activism here at World Beyond War with some broad thoughts and also some specific examples. So I'm just going to get started here. I want to share my screen really quickly. Hopefully you all will be able to see. All right, I think that should be good to go. Wonderful. Can everyone see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up. Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so for us here at World Beyond War, nonviolent activism means growing global anti-war movement and pursuing our three main organizational goals without the use of violence. These goals are designed to serve the ultimate goal of implementing World Beyond War's blueprint for an alternative global security system, or the AGSS, which you can see right up there in the top right corner. And that alternative global security system is one in which peace is pursued by peaceful means. And those three goals are as follows: demilitarize security, manage conflict non-violently, and create a culture of peace. So obviously, Phil's discussion of education also contributes to these three goals. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how nonviolent activism can also move us forward with these goals. So I think it's important to note right off the bat that nonviolent activism is by no means passive or unassertive. At least it doesn't have to be. After all, in practice, it can look like so many different things. The spectrum of nonviolent resistance spans from political confrontation, from traditional forms of political participation in which we might be voting or writing letters, all the way to things like using one's body to block a truck full of military weapons and being transported, or confronting key decision makers when they might not be expecting it. So here on the screen, you can just see a few photos of what nonviolent activism looks like for us, and I'll be discussing a little bit more about that later. So here at World Beyond War, we believe that nonviolent activism at whatever scale or form your context allows is key to building power at the local level and winning real, concrete improvements in people's lives, while also pursuing the larger goal of growing the global anti-war movement. Now, unsurprisingly, our approach is frequently criticized by those who don't believe in or understand the efficacy of nonviolent activism. As David mentioned, the myths of war are extremely pervasive and infiltrate not only people's perception of the conflict in and of itself, but also the ways in which we should be opposing conflict and making change in the world. For us, choosing to engage in nonviolent activism means choosing to embody the values that we want to be reflected in the world around us. In my time at World Beyond War, I think that there has been sort of an example set, especially for folks who feel powerless and demoralized when they look at the world around them. Now, at this point in the conversation, I usually hear a few key critiques being able to bubble up to the surface. Most prominently, I hear things like, that's nice and all, but if you actually want to get things done, that's not really going to fly. And I just want to sort of dispel that really quickly by saying that nonviolent activism is not only a powerful example of sort of way that we can embody the change that we want to see, but also is a highly effective tool for making change. Researchers Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan have demonstrated statistically that from 1900 to 2006, nonviolent resistance was twice as successful as armed resistance and resulted in more stable democracies with less chance of reverting to civil and international violence. In short, nonviolence works better than war at what war is supposed to do. And we now know that countries are more likely to experience the onset of nonviolent campaigns when there is already a greater amount of mobilization around the world. So basically, nonviolent resistance gives rise to nonviolent resistance, gives rise to nonviolent resistance. And we really want to help local groups and individuals around the world be able to start and continue that spark in their community with issues that matter to them. So how does this actually work day in and day out for us? World Beyond War operates through a network of grassroots, decentralized organizing models focused on building power at the local level. And I know that might seem a bit counterintuitive. We're an international organization, so how do we build power at the highly local level? And for us, it's critical that chapters and affiliates that we work with have the tools to organize in their own community based on what campaigns resonate most with their members, while at the same time, of course, moving towards that horizon of long-term war abolition. So I'll delve a bit into those campaigns specifically that we work on that members and chapters can sort of pick and choose depending on what makes sense for their community. Just so you have some organizational context before I delve into those campaigns, as of now, we have individuals in 193 countries that have signed our peace pledge. That's sort of the initial way that we get people involved. We have 22 chapters in 12 countries with 93 affiliates worldwide. And we're really proud to be funded by small donors as well. This broad reach is made possible by combining our long-term goal, war abolition, and implementing it with decentralized and local organizing on the ground. And by the end of this, you're probably going to be sick of me saying decentralized and local organizing, but that really is our bread and butter, and I'm excited to get a bit more into that now. So as I mentioned before, we have a variety of campaigns that our chapters and affiliates are able to get involved with. With war abolition being such a broad and intersectional issue to tackle, activists and organizers have a wide array of campaigns to work through World Beyond War. Most broadly, these include the closed, I'm just gonna list them all and then we're gonna come back really quickly. Include the Closed Bases campaign, Demilitarized Police, Counter Recruitment, Divestment, and more. So first here, I just want to briefly discuss the Closed Bases campaign. The closing of US bases and the removal of US military personnel from foreign countries is critical to the elimination of war, as I probably don't have to tell those of you who are from outside of the US. This campaign is a major focus for World Beyond War. And here in this photo here, you can see a photo from our campaign with Save Sinjavina, and our allies in the struggle to protect a mountain in Montenegro from becoming a NATO military training ground. And this campaign has been making major progress in the last year, and we're really proud to have featured it in our most recent annual conference. This summer, our petition was delivered to an advisor to the Prime Minister, and we were able to get a billboard up right across the street from the government in support of this campaign. A series of actions also led up to the delivery of the petition, including the celebration of Sinjajavana Day in Podgorica on June 18th. There was coverage of this event on television, 3 daily newspapers, and 20 online media outlets. On those same dates, Save Sinjajavana organized a solidarity camp right next to the Sava Lake in Sinjajavana, where they're planning on building this NATO military base. And despite a first day of rain, fog, and wind, people managed well. Some participants even climbed one of the highest peaks in the country, in the area, and were able to be unexpectedly visited by the Prince of Montenegro, Nikola Petrovic. He gave full support of the struggle and told us to count on his support in the future. So I hope that from this example, from this photo, you're sort of seeing how these bigger picture goals of taking down military bases really fit into a local context. Here, there was already movement on the ground, and we were able to lend World Beyond War resources, connect them to the annual conference, so on and so forth, to really amplify that campaign and connect it to a larger struggle to bring down military bases around the world as a part of the campaign for war abolition. So we're kind of moving up and down the scale here, and I'm hoping to do that with the other campaigns that I'll briefly mention as well. Here, another one of our campaigns to demilitarize the police. You can see a sample petition that we've developed to assist those looking to demilitarize their local police force. What's more, we also provide some key real-life examples for folks to get started, including in Charlottesville, where a petition for demilitarization of the police gathered over 1,000 signatures and inspired a resolution stating that the Charlottesville Police Department will not receive military weaponry from the US military or military-style training from US Armed Forces, the military police, or any private company for that matter. So we believe it's critically important to ban militarized policing, whether or not your local police force is currently engaged in it. And these concrete resources, we really believe, help folks on the ground really get off the ground with their campaigns. So often in the peace movement, especially, it can feel so isolating when we're thinking about these issues by ourselves, fighting propaganda by ourselves, and having something concrete to latch onto and rally folks around is really critical to being able to further our goals that I mentioned before. Moving on, I want to discuss a little bit about our campaign for counter-recruitment. This is largely a US-based campaign, but like other campaigns, we're able to extend it to the context of other countries. And this campaign is all about recognizing the US wars start in high schools. The tentacles of massive Pentagon web extend to high school cafeterias and main offices, which I actually experienced as a high school student in the US as well, living right by a military base. We must focus some of our attention on the alarming pace of the militarization of America's public schools. While this campaign has been developed in the US, we really encourage others to take that model and bring it to their own context as well, just like with many of our campaigns, which start in some countries and end up extending internationally. Moving on, I want to discuss a little bit about one of our most popular campaigns to join in on, and that is Divestment, a campaign that's very close to my heart. Grassroots-led divestment campaigns are springing up all over the world. I probably don't have to tell you that. If you know anybody in the university context, you maybe have heard about fossil fuel divestment in universities. But in addition to fossil fuel divestment, there's also divestment from the war machine. Divestment means organizing to remove public and private assets from weapons manufacturers, military contractors, and war profiteers. And I'm just switching to my phone because my printer decided to run out of ink this morning. Public pensions and retirement funds especially are invested directly and indirectly into weapons companies. Teachers and other public servants whose interests lie with promoting human needs have their retirement security tied up with maintaining or enlarging the war industry. Every dollar currently invested in weapons and war is a dollar that could be spent on job creation, education, housing, healthcare, food security, and so much more. This is really critical, especially we're working on a campaign in Canada that you can see here in which we are demanding for Canada to stop arming Saudi Arabia. As was previously mentioned by David, there is currently a crisis in Yemen that's being ignored by Canada, the US, and many more who are complicit in actually investing their money. The largest receiver of Canadian weapons, aside from the US, is actually Saudi Arabia. So while Canada is painting itself as this, peacemaker country, there really is some really insidious actions going on behind the scenes. And we've been able to plug in here in Canada into the divestment campaign in order to really peel back the curtain on that and get to the heart of what's going on. So as you can see here, we have some examples of our Canada Stop Arming Saudi Day of Action, which happened this year on March 26th. During this day of action in 7 cities around Canada, individuals and groups called for an end to the war in Yemen and to demand that Canada stop arming Saudi Arabia. In Toronto, for example, a 50-foot banner was dropped off at the Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland's building, and you can see that on the right there. And that's an example of a sort of direct action, sort of in the middle of the spectrum when you can think of confrontational to non-confrontational. And aside from that, just like other campaigns, there's an international element as well. This isn't just a Canada-based issue or a US-based issue. World Beyond War is a founding member of the Divest from the War Machine Coalition that hosts a robust set of resources and a listing of ongoing campaigns and organizations around the world focused on divestment. Moving on from divestment, I'll talk a little bit about our billboard campaign, which David mentioned recently. And as you can see, there's a lot of material here, so feel free. I'm sure that there's questions loading up in the chat that I'll look at in a bit, but I know that we're sort of going through a lot of information here. So I hope you're able to, again, keep connecting these really specific campaigns to the larger goals of war abolition that we have, and start thinking about how perhaps you can take these campaigns into the context of your own space, into the context of your own military-industrial complex, where however it manifests in your context. So back to billboards. World Beyond War raises funds for independently and independently put up billboards that are pro-peace and anti-war all over the world. And in and of itself, this billboard, as an example of paid media, helps us to reach a broader audience beyond our existing networks and build support for ending all wars. We use messages such as the one that David wrote up before, which is that 3% of US military spending could end starvation on Earth. Obviously, this is a really attention-grabbing statistic, and a billboard is really the perfect way to get that out into the world and get people thinking a bit more about their relationship to the military-industrial complex. This method is, again, sort of our way of connecting different ways of taking action. We have things all the way from dropping banners and being more confrontational to billboards, which are more informational and attention-grabbing all across the spectrum. Moving on, we also have a campaign on the rule of law. Oh, sorry, there's one of our billboards that I wanted to show you. There you can see folks rallying around, and we can see that it also connects to the website and is able to get folks into our network who otherwise may not be.
What's the number, Maya, we're missing at the top there of that billboard? What just?
Oh, that says 3% up
3%.
there.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you for asking. All right. Here we're going towards the end. We have 2 more campaigns that I wanted to touch on here. The first one here is rule of law. One of the many strategies for supporting justice is to encourage the International Criminal Court to prosecute equally and to expand the court to include all countries. We started a petition to Fatou Bensouda, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. It reads, "People of the US and world, ask ICC to prosecute US war crimes." And you can see here we've gotten over 15,000 signatures. And this, again, is just one example. These aren't limited to these petitions, to these actions, but the campaigns that I'm mentioning are more of a framework that we enter folks into when they're entering the world of World Beyond War, if you will. And finally, I just wanted to touch on our final campaign here today, which is the Stop Arms Trade campaign. Weapons shipments, we believe, should be blocked, arm fairs closed, and blood profits protested. And the business of war should be made shameful and not, not something to be proud of, to be frank. This also connects to our divestment campaign, where we're sort of taking social license away from these industries that should be replaced with other more beneficial industries. And you can see here, the context of the stop arms trade has actually facilitated some of our most confrontational, nonviolent direct actions. World Beyond War is a member of the War Industry Resistors Network, a network that links with organizations and coalitions around the world. And this campaign includes others, including Code Pink and others around the world who are working also to stop the arms trade. On the screen here, you can see a protest that we organized in 2022 with the Group Against Arms Fairs and other organizations in a global protest against Lockheed Martin, the largest arms manufacturer in the world, which is based here in the US. In 2022, hundreds of people have blocked the opening to the CANSEC Arms Fair, North America's largest weapons and defense industry convention in Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada. 40-foot banners saying blood on your hands, stop profiting from war, and arms dealers not welcome actually obstructed the way into the conference and was able to stop the conference and stop trucks moving in for some time. Importantly, we were also able to obstruct the convention center right before Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand was slated to give the opening keynote address. And here you can see here some World Beyond War members lying in the road there in the bottom left, bravely putting their bodies on the line to stop the conference and take a stand against the global arms trade. So if you're still with me here, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the potential entry points into the world of World Beyond War in nonviolent activism, and how can we even, start delving into these issues. And for us, we sort of scale things down into a chapter format, as I've mentioned before. And these chapters are really, really key into helping folks not just facilitate big discussions, but also local approaches that funnel our resources into the grassroots level. As Phill mentioned, we provide resources, training, discounted books, online courses, listservs, all those good things to folks on the ground, and actually help them start up their chapters so they're not just left alone to their own devices. So that's where someone like me comes in. If somebody in Canada is looking and they're looking for a place to channel their anti-war energy into, they have a few friends, we can get started with something as simple as a movie screening or a book club and make sure that that really gets up and running and goes from there. This is just some of the resources that we offer, but I'm going to move past that for the sake of time. And moving here, I want to talk a little bit more about what this can look like. Here we see some traditional protests in addition to some more non-traditional protests on the bottom right here. And this is just some of the actions that our chapters have engaged in around the world. It's really key that we maintain this decentralized model because over time, it's not sustainable for our small full-time staff, not even full-time, small staff to continue to work and understand the things that people on the ground really will always understand better than us. I'm not going to understand always why this small town on the west coast of Canada, when I'm on the east coast even, is opposing a certain resolution. But my chapter coordinator in Vancouver or Victoria, BC, British Columbia on the west coast is going to understand a lot more the internal dynamics and what will be effective to making change in their community. And importantly, I just like to end sort of with how we actually celebrate the wins that we have gotten with our chapters. Just this year, we awarded the Organizational War Abolisher, that's how you pronounce that word, of 2022 award to the Whidbey Environmental Action Network based in Whidbey Island in Washington State. And this organization really embodies sort of the local organizing sort of model that we like to celebrate here at World Beyond War and support with concrete resources. That network succeeded in stopping the Washington State Parks and Recreation Committee in hosting the US Navy for military training. So they actually were able to stop the US Navy from using their grounds as military training. And this was key for them, and this was years in the making, and so we really wanted to celebrate that with our War Abolisher Awards this year. Further, we also celebrated an Italian union, Italian dock workers who had blocked shipments to a number of wars in recent years. And we really celebrated the fact that these local groups were able to understand their context, plug into the actual campaigns that we're working with, and highlight and hopefully be able to inspire others to act similarly in their own part of the world. Finally, of course, I could go on to talk many, many minutes, many, many hours about the individuals and groups who have also taken up the call, aside from these incredible groups on the screen, to take action and take it upon themselves to act in the interest of war abolition and peace building. But for the sake of time, I'm going to let you all check these out on our website. We have a lot of resources there, a lot of success stories that I personally find very inspiring, especially when it's hard to find inspiration on your TV screens these days in terms of war, as always. And I really want you instead to come away from this discussion with a bit more of a framework for understanding how we combine education and action in the pursuit of war abolition and in the construction of a better world from the grassroots. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you, everyone.
Wow. Oh my goodness, Maya, Phill, and David, you've blown our minds. I can tell you that collectively. What an extraordinary thing to learn about your work. And isn't it amazing we can be in this field, if you like, for years and years and years and not come across each other. And there are so many organizations, and I'm sure you guys have this in the peace movement globally and locally. It's just astounding how many groups, organizations, initiatives, platforms, communities are rising with aligned work such as what you're doing at World Beyond Word. Just congratulations to each of you. I was impressed and surprised, David, when I dug a little bit around your website to find, because it's such a sophisticated organization, international, doing incredible education, and the local community activism that Maya was just talking about. I was amazed to learn that you were established in 2014. I don't know why. I was expecting an organization to have been around for a lot longer. So massive congratulations and thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you, Bob and Noel, for connecting us here in Peace Week. There's so much here to unpack. I want to begin with a question. I certainly have questions myself that I hope we get a chance to get to, but I want to begin with a question we've got here in the chat from Karen. Let me just pull that up here. It was a question about, what practically we might have been able to have done. Can you give some examples of what might have been done to prevent the Ukraine war? Now, obviously not going back to some of the conditions in which that war began, and you mentioned before, David, the NATO expansionism and other things, which if we really wanted to stop it, there might be a complex answer. But in terms of once war was on the brink, what are some of the things that could have been done? Having mothers and babies on the border, Karen suggests, for example, followed by televised negotiations. Is strengthening the UN a part of it? What could have been done to prevent the war from your perspective?
Thank you, Ben. And I want to say thank you to Phill, who I've known for years, was one of the best educators we have, but especially to Maya, who's only been with us for weeks and is filling in for our Canada organizer who's out on maternal leave. Imagine what Maya is going to be doing in the years ahead. I get this question a lot, and I love to know whether the question is, what possibly could the poor innocent Russians have done, or what possibly could the poor innocent Ukrainians have done, because it's a different answer depending on which question it is. And I have a guess which question it is, but the insult is so deep if I guess wrong that I'm not going to guess. I'm just going to try to answer both. But when the war started is also a question that has to be answered, because there was violence for years. There was a coup, there was ongoing, and there was highly escalating violence in the Donbass prior to what everyone thinks of as the day the war began. And so, what could Russia have done differently when ethnic and Russian-speaking Ukrainians were threatened and Ukraine was attacking Donbass and there had been a coup and so forth? Well, Russia was in an incredible position Russia was mocking these daily predictions of a massive Russian invasion and had half the world laughing, and was rescuing and evacuating people who felt threatened from the Donbass and giving them homes in Russia. Russia could have talked about the rule of law. Russia could have signed on to international treaties and the International Criminal Court and sought investigations and prosecutions. Russia could have asked the UN to oversee a public vote to be respected by everyone on the future of Crimea as well as the Donbass, and asked for compliance with the Minsk agreements, and could have, in fact, recruited worldwide and trained and utilized out of Russia unarmed, nonviolent actors and protectors to go in, yes, with video and media. Flip the question to what I think is more likely the one I need to answer. What could the poor people of Ukraine have done? Not going back in time, not going back to the coup or the escalation or the weapons shipments, but what could they have done in that moment? Well, if you had organization, if you had government organization, you could use massive, unarmed, organized, nonviolent resistance to incredible effect. But even without it, we saw on a very small scale, and we saw this from both sides over the past several years in the Donbass, but we saw on a very small scale people very effectively using unarmed, nonviolent resistance. And there are people, including one of our board members and friends of ours right now, working to organize nonviolent actions in Ukraine. But you also could have had, it's hard to know whether I'm supposed to say what the government should have done or what an individual in their house should have done. Or
I think, David, that Karen, sorry to interrupt you. Karen did clarify. She's talking about what the world community of peace people, what could have been the response from the community of peace organizations or people who want peace globally. What could we have done
Well, there are millions of answers, and I need to shut up really soon so we can get on to other questions. But I've written at enormous length on this, and we've done endless webinars on this. I think the most important thing we can be doing is demanding negotiations rather than escalations and weapons shipments. And there have been negotiations succeeding on prisoner exchanges and grain exports, and there have been negotiations darn near succeeding, were it not for harmful foreign intervention on making peace. And we need to get back to the idea that negotiations are not shameful or treasonous any more than hugging is.
Beautiful, beautiful. Does Phill or Maya have anything you want to you add to that before we maybe go to a follow-up?
Nothing specifically, just to highlight well, two things really. One is related to positionality, remembering that, what's happening right now, Ukraine, Russia is terrible. And at the same time, there's other wars that are taking place around the world that are not getting the same amount of coverage, which do require the attention as well. So there's one thing about positionality. In the sense that, is it because it's happening in Europe that it's getting more attention than some of the other wars that are not getting the attention? Of course, at World Beyond War, we're against all violence, we're against all wars. So there's one thing. And the second thing, again, that Maya kind of highlighted, and David mentioned, Yuri, one of our board members, talks very powerfully about this, is the utility of nonviolence. It works. It's proven to work. We need to be talking more about the utility, the power of nonviolence right now, rather than sending, of course, arms and things like this, which of course makes us less secure, more armed, and less likely to move towards peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Go ahead, Maya.
I wanted to mention really quickly, sort of as a concrete example of action that has taken place, is not only targeting governments in terms of Ukraine and Russia, but also targeting the corporations, the war profiteers that have benefited directly and actually made millions because of this war. We like to say that those war profiteers are actually the only people who end up winning wars, the only groups that end up winning wars. So that's something that we're doing here in North America, from afar, rather than sending weapons shipments and those kinds of things, we're encouraging folks to divest from the military industrial complex and call out the fact that those companies are actually making money off of people's suffering. And that's just an example of what something like a type of action that we can take that's not intervention and escalating, like David mentioned, but rather de-escalation and that sort of thing.
I'm very interested in your thoughts around the role of the nation state, the United Nations, national sovereignty. I think, Phill, you mentioned before, one of the areas you do in your education is global governance. And just when you talk about on your website, the ultimate goal here is a just and sustainable peace. And yet the notion of national sovereignty has embedded in it almost an inalienable right to wage war when one wants to, even when part of Leagues of Nations or United Nations or whatever it may be. As soon as the national interest gets to a trigger point, nations tend to pull out of such agreements and do the thing that they're wanting to do anyway, under some belief in national sovereignty. On a round whole planet, is this idea of national sovereignty, is it perhaps one of the chief barriers to peace? And how can you speak to the strategy or the solution for an evolution of our global governance systems that will enable the ultimate goal of a just and lasting peace?
So who's that one to? Who wants to go?
I think he mentioned your name, Phill, although I certainly want to speak to it too.
So a couple of things. I think if there was one perhaps peace-building organization in the world where some of the attention should be focused, then it should be the UN in terms of reforming them to make them more democratic and many other things, veto and things like this, which we flesh out in our book, A Global Security System, of how we might go about rethinking, some of the work that the UN does. That's one point. I mean, the other point as well is, and again, people have different perspectives on this, but the borders which created are very artificial in themselves. So I think that's an issue. Another issue is, and we lay out again in our book, is how do we move away from this idea of state security, which again is wrapped up in ideas of state sovereignty, but then connected to broader ideas of responsibility to protect and things like this, which can in itself be justified for intervention, to move towards more kind of ideas of human security, etc. And we lay out in the book that we're now, systems thinking tells us that we're living in an interconnected, globalized world. None of us are safe until all of us are safe. So we really need to think in those terms. So there's part of a response to your question, Ben.
I think I had noticed a question also in the chat about treaties banning war and so forth. And I think it relates to this question because there are, and I put a link in the chat to worldbeyondwar.org/constitutions, which is a list and description of constitutions, treaties, and laws that ban or restrict war. And there are constitutions of numerous nations that explicitly and voluntarily limit their national sovereignty. And we should know that, and we should recommend it to other nations. And there are treaties that nations are party to and that are the supreme law of those nations under their own constitutions that severely limit national sovereignty for the better. And we should know that and tell them. And there are treaties like the Kellogg-Briand Pact that ban war, all war, good wars, bad wars, humanitarian, democratic wars, every war. And there are treaties like the Non-Proliferation Treaty that require not just the elimination of nuclear weapons, but the disarmament of all weapons. And sometimes I'm afraid to mention these things for fear that someone in the US government will hear me and go find that treaty and tear it up, rather than start abiding by it. But we have to take that risk and start demanding that people become aware of the laws we already have that we could never in a million years create if we had to create them, and try to get them abided by.
Thank you, David. And that I think goes to one of the questions, Noel, you had as well about, isn't there a treaty for the US preventing it from going to war, which seems ridiculous, but it seems like there's something in place. May, did you have anything you wanted to add about this, the challenge of national sovereignty on the road to a just and sustainable peace?
I think David covered a lot of it. David and Phill covered a lot of it. I think, again, I feel like my role in this conversation is turning into just bringing it local over and over again. I think that having folks just find a way that they can enter this conversation from their own communities, and sort of do what we call like power mapping, and finding out where those power centers that really contribute to those, thoughts of security and those sorts of things live within their community, because it doesn't always have to be going to the actual UN building and talking to actual UN personnel in order to make a difference with these kinds of things. There's lots of ways in which we can sort of chip away at this institution in our own communities.
Yeah, really impressed with the level of education that you're providing, and super excited to just know you exist. Both, or what the work that you're doing, with educating youth and intergenerational, intercultural, applying all of this wisdom and energy to World Beyond War, and whatever we can do to support you and stay connected, I think, is something we definitely want to commit to. This community, just to sort of share back to you, David and Phill, may have mentioned a few things about Jonathan Granoff, who did a session yesterday with Deepak Chopra actually on human security, and it was from the deepest personal to the global. So this conversation is one that's very ripe in our community. This year, the 40th anniversary of that first celebration or observance of the International Day of Peace in the early 1980s. I'm wondering, Phill or anyone, if you're working with Jeremy Gilley from Peace One Day in the UK, or how, I guess the question to perhaps finish up on, how can we better, as civil society, how can we better coordinate and organize, resource, and execute in honor of Martin Luther King's mandate that we need to organize more effectively than we have until now, and we need to learn to organize more effectively than the military-industrial complex. How can we do that better as this sleeping giant of 10 million organizations, initiatives, platforms around the world of civil society? How can we do that to better become a system of influence on the planet?
Well, I can certainly speak to this, and Phill and Maya may want to as well, but the answer is yes, regarding Jonathan Granoff and regarding Jeremy Gilley and regarding numerous other Jonathans and Jeremys and people around the world. And, we try at World Beyond War to join and take part in every coalition we learn of that we can support, that aligns with our principles. And we try to invite every organization we can that seems appropriate and desirous to be an affiliate of ours, and to work with communities everywhere we can to form new chapters. And so, we don't think we need to combine everyone into one organization. We think it's important that there are different organizations with variations on the theme of working for peace. But we think it's important for everyone to work together in those many areas where we agree and are stronger, working together, including with organizations that are not focused on peace, but are focused on environment or poverty or homelessness or racism or any of the many, many issues on which war ought really to be a big factor, and typically is not, for reasons of flags and propaganda. So, we agree with the goal, and any advice and assistance is welcome, but we're working on it.
Thank you. And I guess I'll make 2 points. One is to do with the importance of the individual, and the other one is to do with the importance of the collective. So Johan Galton, one of the fathers of peace studies, often talks about there are tasks for everyone in peace building. So we all have a role to play. Peace is not just for states, organizations. The idea of a culture of peace is that everyone has a role to play, in that. So the individual is important. And at the same time, of course, you mentioned about Martin Luther King and Gandhi and things like this, and we remember the names because of it's an individual, but these were collaborative efforts. There's no way we remember them unless they didn't mobilize people to work in collaboration. So at World Beyond War, we can't do any of the work that we do without the wonderful people on the ground. They are the real superstars, like Maya's always spoke about, and David, others. That those are the real, the superstars on the ground that are mobilizing for change on the ground. So it takes both individual effort to be the change, turn the mirror around, look at yourself, but also a collective effort of how do we work together. So I guess this is a call to say that, there's many understandings of peace, there's many approaches to peace building, like David said, but we really want to learn with and collaborate with you all. So please, we hope that our time together here today leads to more time together in the future of, working together to move even closer to a world beyond war. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we do have one last question from Marty K. Casey's got a hand up, but I just wanted to present through Peace Week, we are launching the 7 core needs, and the 7 core needs, just to really flash it up in brief, if I can perhaps share my screen for a second. I think it's relevant here. We started on day 1 of Peace Week with living soil. We had Vandana Shiva, an incredible panel. Day 2 is yesterday, was healthy water. Day 3 is vitalizing food. Day 4, fresh, clean air. Day 5 is physical and emotional safety. And then day 6 is comfortable shelter. And 7 is the conditions to manifest individuals' potential. So today's about food, but just in what you were all saying, David and Phill and Maya, the interconnectedness and the whole systems approach. The war in Ukraine has created incredible shortages in food and food production and food pricing. So all of these are interrelated. So that's one. I think there's great power in recognition of that everybody who's working in whatever part of the spectrum for this transformation is contributing to the whole. And I think that is something that we can take heart in. And as I said before, even learning about your existence is a real boost for us. Marty, did you have a quick question just as we close today? Let me get you unmuted there, and we will close in a couple of minutes. Go ahead. Marty K. Casey. Dr. Marty K. Casey is from the Ungun Institute. I'm going to bring her up here. We don't have a lot of time, Marty, but jump in there with a question.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say this was very empowering. I happened to just turn it on and I couldn't turn it off. You guys are amazing. I happen to live in St. Louis, Missouri, which is just like 10 minutes from where the unrest of Ferguson took place. And the one thing that I wanted to just share is that to all of you all, but specifically Maya, this is a good time right now to go to the cities that have actually experienced an extreme unrest and to teach the things and the tools and everything that you were speaking about. And the time is like, I would say it's like right now where we are experiencing a low tide where there's nothing going on and people can receive the information better than versus trying to receive those instructions when they're in the middle of active trauma. So I don't know if there's something that myself or I can do to open up those doors of opportunities here in St. Louis and maybe even some of the other cities where I've worked with some other individuals. But the information that you all have is so priceless. I just could not sit here and not share that much with you.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And I'm actually originally from the Midwest as well, so strong connection there too. But I wanted to mention, I think it would be great to connect you with our organizing director, Greta, who works in the United States mostly, and she would totally be able to plug in, and I completely agree with the sentiment. Reaching people when they are most reachable is so key to this, as I'm sure Phill could also mention through education. But thank you so much for sharing that, and I'll direct message you Greta's email.
Thank you.
We have a lot of friends and allies around St. Louis, including Veterans for Peace, which in the U.S. is based there. And we try to work on educating people about the vicious cycle of war fueling racist violence, domestically fueling war, and the historical pattern of racist violence in the United States soaring just after major wars, as well as the whole problem of demilitarizing police and getting the military weapons out of the hands of the police, and by the way, out of the hands of the military too. So we'd love to work with you on any of this.
Thank you. And
Marty's
thank
amazing.
you, Ben.
Marty's amazing. That's a great connection. Just in real rapid closing here, we actually have a Russian language program starting in 30 minutes in the translation Zoom room. It's how global and personal challenges activate human potential. It will be translated into English in live translation. Thank you, David Swanson. Thank you, Phill Gittins, and thank you, Mayor Garfinkel, for being with us for World Beyond War. We are supercharged, and I've signed up. I've signed the Peace Pledge. You got at least one new supporter, and I suspect many more from your efforts today. So thank you for being with us in Peace Week, and we look forward to the journey to come all the way through to a just and sustainable peace on earth. Thank you for